I'm an autism awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different, the stranger than. I'm an autism awareness angel. It's good, cause I'm cool with the unique behavior. I'm an autism awareness angel. Will you accept me? Cause I accept you. I'm an autism awareness angel, cause a view from the spectrum is a better point of view. The question at hand, are you aware?
Hello, I'm Tally, and welcome back to Autism 30. Today, we're going to have another Parent Talk panel talking with you this evening. Now, you'll notice a little bit of a different order of people who are here this evening, and that's because of the fact that with all autism families, schedules can get difficult to meet up, and we used to be a panel of three who were Kathy, Tina, and of course me, Tally. And believe it or not, I promised a Parent Talk way back in June. But typical like autism families, meeting up schedules can be difficult at times, and especially for parents like us whose children really do take first priority. So believe it or not, we've made a plan to schedule our time, and unfortunately things came up and so on and so forth. So what we've decided to do for the Parent Talk is welcome another member in so we can include more voices into the Parent Talk. Isn't that right, Tina?
Yeah, I'm really excited.
And so basically this evening, we're including another member who is wonderful and part of our community down here in the Lower Mainland of Dumfries, British Columbia, and her name is Jess. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're so pleased to have you on board. Now, Jess decided to join us, and we're really pleased that she did because I know we've seen her out, and she has a lot of really great information, doesn't she, Tina?
Jess is super awesome. Yeah, she offers a lot of insight, and she's been a real mentor to me in the last little while. So I'm so glad to have her on the panel with us.
And I'm sure she'll be a mentor for some of you listening out there, just as Tina, you've been for many of our listeners as well.
Aw.
So Jess, do you want to introduce yourself to our members?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, first of all, thank both of you. Thanks for having me here and for the kudos. So I have a child with autism who is school aged, and I've been in the game now for a number of years. Our diagnosis was about 4 years ago. So I think we have some information. We still have a lot to learn. We are sort of zigzagging all over the Lower Mainland for different therapies and things like that. So I feel fairly educated. I guess we'll see as we move forward in the podcast.
Well, that's great. And if any of you have questions for Jess, you can also go to our website at autism30.com and ask a question specifically to her, and likewise to Tina. If you have any specific questions you would like to ask Tina, you can go to our website and click on the word contact and fill in your details in that email, and I'll forward you the questions to them if you have specific questions to both of these. And similarly, if you have questions to Kathy, she will be joining us hopefully at some other point along the line. And we really welcome your questions in, as I've welcomed in all of the questions further on. Now, Tina, would you like to say anything?
Oh, I just wanted to say to Jess that it doesn't matter if we don't know anything. That's the good thing about Parent Talk is that, well, hopefully we know something, but we don't have to have all the answers, because I think hopefully my understanding is the listeners are listening in to get a parent perspective. And so we just kind of talk about our experiences and what we do know, and know that there's, like you said, a lot more to learn. But yeah.
Absolutely. And I've been in the game longer than you have, and so has Tina. And I know we both are continuously learning, but I don't know how you feel, Tina, but what I actually love is hearing a fresh perspective from new people coming in, because they can always offer a different viewpoint.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I've learned a lot just from all the different moms that I've met along the journey, and everyone teaches me something new, and then I just incorporate that, and it's really exciting.
Absolutely. And so I really want to thank our audience for sending in your wonderful questions to our panel, which we're really pleased to answer them today. And so I think we should just start. What do you think, ladies?
Yeah, let's do it. Hit
Wonderful.
us.
Now, one of the questions I received by going to one of the conferences, which was held way back in November at McMath Secondary School in Steveston in Richmond, British Columbia. Now, that question was, how do you deal with other parents always asking you for help? Tina, how would you answer that question?
Well, I think I'd have to say that in a lot of ways it depended like the day, month, year that they were asking for help and where
true.
I was in my journey. So I've certainly been cyclical in terms of my ability to help people. And so there's been times where just life was very challenging and I was burnt out myself, and it was really hard to sort of be able to be the giver to other families when I had so much going on.
And I think that's really important to actually note within oneself. I think the fact that you actually are keeping in touch with how you are as a person to make sure that you're not emptying the bottle of energy for your own child. I think that's really wise.
It's true. And there's been times when I've met up with other parents at the cost of spending time with my own kids. And I'm a full-time working parent, so there's only so many hours to give, right?
Absolutely. And that's great advice too.
Yeah. But other times I've been super happy to help other parents. And so there was a time in my life where I was really keen to understand all the different types of therapy and their approaches. So the behavioral versus the developmental approaches and what they were and what they could and could not offer. And so I felt like that was a real niche in our circle of friends and our support group. So I felt like that was a real value that I could offer. Parents would come and say, like, I don't understand, what's the difference between floor time and ABA? And I could kind of break it down a little bit.
So and I remember asking many questions on that subject myself.
Yeah. So, I really felt like that was a nice way to deal with the parents asking for help, because you could just sort of explain the facts and explain the philosophy behind the different therapies so that they could make a choice for themselves. And I could then give my own advice about like why one therapy wasn't good for me or my daughter in terms of like the approach or, different aspects of my daughter's profile that made one therapy a better fit than another, and giving advice about like how you can change therapies and stuff. I will say though, I went through then another cycle when I realized that like maybe before I thought I had more answers, and then I went through this wave where I felt like giving too much advice put a lot of responsibility on me, and I realized this is like the life of these kids, and they were like listening to what I said as gospel. And even though like I really believed it, some of the recommendations like this therapy is great, then the family couldn't get into that therapy. It was full. The wait list was full. And then they were devastated that they like believed in what I told them and they couldn't access this therapy. And that responsibility just fell on me like a thud, and I felt very upset about it. And then I realized that like what works for my daughter, I mean, I knew it intuitively would not work for every child, but it still ended up, I feel like, coming off like one therapy was better than another. And so that made me rethink again my approach to how I help other parents when they're asking for help. And so now that I'm older and wiser, I would say I think I've found a balance in terms of how much time I have to give and I don't burn out myself, really just laying out the facts and letting people make their own choices.
Yes.
But I think every person is going to deal with that in their own way. Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why people are drawn to you to ask for advice is because of the fact that you do take the questions that parents ask with the responsibility and weight of the world, which means you've put a lot of thought and energy into the advice that you give other parents, and you genuinely care. And I know that comes off. So I can see why people would be drawn to ask you various questions, as well as what I love about your advice to give our parents out there or our audience members is the fact that I'm sure many of you out there are exactly that way, where you do want to help and involve yourself, but the responsibility can be overwhelming at times, where you feel personally responsible and to be mindful of that. Mm-hmm. So I'm really happy that you mentioned that as well.
Mm-hmm. I think another reason people seek you out is not just because you have the heart and the passion to share what you think and how you feel, but you've done the research.
Absolutely, she
and
has.
You're smart and you think it through in very, not just logical ways, but it's so clearly well thought out and well articulated that I think it's so helpful.
Aw,
It
it's
really
a little
is.
Tina Lovin. Oh, that's nice. Anyway.
Well, you deserve it for all the help that you've given, and
I'm
including
blushing.
they can't see
And it's
that,
not
but
the
we
wine.
can.
For me, it is the one.
And what about you, Jess?
Yeah, I like Tina. There's been times when I have felt so overwhelmed that the idea of helping out another parent, I didn't feel capable because I felt like I was drowning. But I would say, actually, sometimes helping out someone else makes me feel like I'm drowning less because I'm able to incur positive change. I have to be mindful too of how much time I'm spending doing that. I find that I'm involved in a lot of groups online, so Facebook groups, Google groups, things like that. And when parents seek advice on those groups, it doesn't take long to respond. Usually the advice or the information they're looking for would just be a couple of sentences in response, like, oh, they're looking for a clinician who does diagnosis, or they're looking for what's the best place to do adapted soccer, or my kid needs, maybe more general, my kid needs to be more
Yes.
physically active. What are ideas out there? And you might be like, oh, I know this great adapted soccer league, or I know this great adapted baseball league, or they do inclusive gymnastics over here, and you could shoot off an email about some pro and con experiences. So that
Yes.
kind of stuff is really easy. And there's about 3 or 4 Facebook groups I'm in for parents of special needs children. And I'm on Facebook every day anyway. So I look, and if I scan through and I see something I think I can add value to, I will respond. And then, I have offered in the past. So from time to time, I do get emails and requests to help. And I'm at a place lately anyways where I feel really comfortable that I have the time and the energy and some of the knowledge to help out. Where I'm in awe of is parents who take that a step further. There's parents I know of that will go with you to your child's IEP
Yes.
meeting, will go with you to your child's medical appointment,
Yes.
those kinds of things. And I think, God bless those parents. They're amazing people.
Yes,
who
they
will,
certainly
who will
are.
go and do and give you that level of support. And that's amazing. I'm not quite there yet myself. Maybe when my child's older and I have a bit more bandwidth. And
I've thought about that. Like when my daughter is a teen or a young adult and maybe more independent, I might be able to like take everything that I've learned and help it, and it's interesting you mentioned the social media. There's a lot of people seeking advice on social media. And at one point I had created like a little website that kind of put down everything that I thought, and I called it like what I've learned about having a child with autism in BC or something, and it had little sun on it. But it was challenging because I felt like I didn't really want to release it to the public because I didn't want to put myself out there with my opinions and then have the wrath of like anyone who disagreed with my opinions. And again, it goes to like purporting one thing is better than another. I'm happy to say it to your face, but it's a different thing to publish it online, right?
very
And
true.
so
And there's also the liability too often
it's
when you
true.
publish things online. Like I know Autism 30 is non-political, non-denominational website, and we make that very clear on our policy online. So I clearly understand where you're coming from. But Jess, I think you've given really good advice, because I know often people will go to an individual face-to-face and get information. But as you mentioned, and Tina, as you mentioned as well, there's a lot of information on Facebook. And so if you do ask a question on Facebook about the various groups, maybe at some point we'll put various groups up there if people are interested, where they can ask information and get the response back from an autism parent who's been there as well.
I just wanted to give a plug as well for the search tool on Facebook, because one thing
Yes.
I've noticed in some of the ASD groups is that someone will post a question and that question has been asked several times. And so sometimes parents feel disappointed that only a few people have taken the time to answer. But I think there can be like a social media fatigue. So it may be, you know, you're coming in and asking a question, but it's probably been asked before. And that search tool function, I've used it myself.
Can you, that's really good. I actually haven't heard of that. So can you actually tell people what that function is and where to find it?
I think it looks a little bit differently if you're using Facebook on a desktop or on a tablet or an iPhone or a phone of some sort. But any group has a search tool. So I think on a computer it's on the left-hand side, and I think on the app it's kind of mid-section, but it just says search. The thing is, you're not searching all of Facebook, so you need to go within the group that you've asked to join. A lot of these groups are private or semi-private, or they have different settings. So you'll want to try to find a Facebook group I would say it's worthwhile to try to find a local Facebook group. I mean, the national ones are great. They have 100,000 members. They can be very, very helpful. But if you can find a local group as well, where you can ask about, local access to resources or funding, etc.
That's really good
and so
advice.
kind of, spread your oats or whatever, just have lots of Facebook groups, and you can go to them with different questions and then use that search tool to try to find what people have answered before. And then if you don't find it, you can always post a question, but I find it's a gold mine of information.
That's really good advice. And I suggest that people around the world, because we are heard across the world, that's really good advice to find local access to your community, because I know, as Tina just said, that many of the people out there listening might not have access to what is available for us, let's say here in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. So I thank you for adding that piece of information in. I know myself, I used to help out people an awful lot way back when, and I found because I, like you, cared so much about the kids. Of course, myself being a teacher, I want to help all children. I didn't know that in helping all the children, I would have nothing left for my own child at that time. So my vessel got drained a lot, which is unfortunate. So what I ended up doing is I ended up helping people sporadically. And then I found myself way too involved in their lives, where I took the baggage home with me. And once again, as a result, I had very little to give for my child. And I thought, but I want to help out. And I know that's one of the reasons why I actually started the podcast originally, because this podcast, I know exactly specifically when I'm going to help somebody out. I can spend time, give advice within this podcast. And if they want to receive the information, then they can log on to a podcast to actually hear the information, similar to what you were talking about, Jess, where if people send you questions in Facebook, in your time when you're prepared, you can actually answer those questions. And you actually know when you have availability to answer those questions, where sometimes I'm sure, Tina, you've gotten those calls at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning with a parent freaking out for whatever reason. And of course you want to be there for them, but unfortunately that with me, I just found it took away, and I didn't find I was helpful to anybody in the end. So
it's all about balance. Yeah,
absolutely.
But there has been some families that it's years later, I meet them at an autism event, and they say, "You changed my life. Years ago, you told me XYZ, and it changed my perspective, and this is all the great things that have happened since then." And I know for me, when we were just diagnosed, there was a person like that. There is,
yes,
and she lives far away. If she's listening, she'll know who she was. And she had a daughter who was diagnosed with autism, but then went on to get some more testing, and the diagnosis was changed to ADHD and sensory processing disorder. And if you guys think I'm read, and oh my goodness, this woman has read everything under the sun, like high level neurological textbooks about these things, and just so much insight and so intelligent. And she changed our life. She gave me a lot of good information and perspective about what kinds of therapies would work for my daughter.
Yes.
And she was able to just crystallize a lot of things for me and be a real advocate when I didn't even realize I needed an advocate, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And thinking back to the way things were in BC, even even, 5-6 years ago, there were some therapies that you had to whisper, I feel like, to each other, because one
Absolutely.
therapy was dominating the landscape. And so you almost felt like a heretic if you didn't follow the most common therapy. And so
unfortunately, that still exists today.
It's true.
Where Tina, maybe we'll get into this in another podcast. Where unfortunately, when you get the diagnosis of autism, you don't realize that there are different groups and different camps of thoughts, and some of them very much stick together and they don't communicate with one another. And I call it very political thinking. But I would love to address that in another podcast. But I'm thankful that you mentioned a hint of that.
I didn't mean to get us sidetracked, but the point is, I had someone that helped me, and so even though when I was drained, when I dug deep and I found those connections, they've survived for years, and I've been able to turn some of those people into really good friends. And so
Which is
sometimes
lovely.
you've talked about how you feel better after you've helped people, Jess, and how you, even if you're drained, it kind of makes things lighter in some way, and you can find that companionship and that sharing. And even if they're not as far along in the journey as you, maybe you'll see how far you have come, and that you do have stuff to offer, and that all the challenges you've overcome, the benefit of that is you get to help someone else. So
100%. And I didn't want to get, I hope I didn't get negative when I was talking, because
No,
you're 100%, you're 100% right that when you do help somebody, you do feel good, because you feel that you are contributing back to the people who've helped you. So you're progressing the knowledge forward to helping the next generation of people. And I totally get that. But I think to the parents out there, do find your
balance.
the balance in when you're helping people, and be mindful of the energy level that you have left for your own child and your own family, which kind of leads me into my second question. What do you say when a doctor asks you to give your information to other parents so you can help them? Because I'm sure many of you, and I know myself, a doctor has called me up and said this family has been recently diagnosed. They're completely lost because of the fact that doctors are unable to share your information out with their clients without your consent. We'll ask you to share your contact information so those parents can contact you, so that there's a point for them. Jess, how what would you answer to that?
Yeah, I've never been asked by one of our doctors. None of our doctors have ever asked us that question, but I have been asked by different therapy providers or SCDP, which right now I forget what that stands, Supported Childhood Development Program, and the Infant Development Program before them had asked if I would connect with new parents into the program. I said absolutely, 100% yes, and I always say yes, and I've yet to been asked. So I feel like it's one of those really easy wins for me, because I look good, because I say yes, and then no one ever reaches out. So yay. But no, for sure I would say yes, and it just really leads back to the previous question. It's because I feel like someone was there that and helped me, a fellow mom, and I remember after we'd been on a journey a couple of years, and she certainly had taught me so much, and I wrote her this letter about how much she changed our lives as a family. And I mean, I was bawling when I wrote it. I can't imagine what she felt like when she read it. I'm sure she was in tears too. So I look at us like this giant human pyramid, where we're all helping each other.
It's an interesting visual in my mind.
I said it, and then I was like, that looks weird. But, we're all helping each other up, and we're propping each other up. And I never... I always think, like, I hope at one point, if I ever have to reach out to a family to help my child, I wouldn't be turned away at, there's always room at the inn, or whatever the expression is. And so, yeah, my answer to that would be yes, for sure. But I think, again, back to the previous question, it's a yes, but it's not necessarily a floodgate yes. Like, yes, I will help you. Call me at 3 or 4 in the morning and I'll be there. It's more like, no, don't call me at 3 or 4 in the morning, but yes, I'll be there. Yes, we can have these discussions, and I'll do what I can to support, but that will have some boundaries around it that work for my family.
And you want to know what? There's another keyword: boundaries. I think once again, you were smarter than I was. I didn't initially set up the boundaries with the parents that I helped. So to people to be mindful of that as well. But, I value your honesty and the question that no doctor has ever asked. Wow. And what about you, Tina?
Yeah, again, not from doctors, no. But I have to say we don't have much of a relationship with our doctors. Like my daughter doesn't require psychotropic or psychiatric medications, and so at this point, short of we don't go to the doctor for colds. So, there has been some things over the years. But anyway, I'm the same as Jess. I've had like preschool providers and service providers ask me, and I've always said yes. And usually, it goes really well. And the only one little point that I would share is my husband was actually asked, and this is just a great thing that he said in response, and I've always remembered it because I was so proud of him. But there was a family that was struggling in preschool, and they didn't want to have their son assessed, and so the preschool provider asked my husband to reach out to them, and so he talked a little bit about our daughter and our journey, and what they said to him was, "Oh, autism. Oh, we couldn't handle it if he had autism." And hubby said, "Well, for all you know, you are dealing with it. You're just dealing with it on your own and without any help."
That's beautiful.
It's beautiful. Like, the diagnosis doesn't change your child.
Absolutely not.
It just gives you what you need, right? And so, another interesting thing is, and maybe I'm taking this too far aside, is what do you do with those families where you see something and you have concerns, but nobody's asked your opinion? And I don't know if that's a whole nother podcast.
Oh, I think that's a definite whole other podcast.
Yeah.
But you want to know what, Tina? I actually think that would be a brilliant podcast because I'm sure because of the fact that we're now an autism family, we pretty much know the signs and know what to look out for, where many people, unfortunately, in our society don't know what to look out for. And I know that's a predicament that we've all been in, where we've clearly seen somebody who is undiagnosed, but who really should be on that path and question what to do. So
yeah, well, we'll tuck that one away for another day.
Yeah, I want in on that. Yeah, and I always tell my husband that, in the movie The Sixth Sense, where the little boy says, "I see dead people. I see them everywhere."
Yes.
And I'm like, I see autistic people. I see them everywhere.
Yes, you do.
I do, and whether I'm at a school or at a water park or at the playground or at the mall or anywhere. And I think on the one, I always, I feel so heartwarmed just because I'm like, oh, like
So
refer
do
to them
I.
as our
That's
team.
it.
And that's our thing. I'm like, oh, our team, like our team's here in the house, but when my child was younger and in preschool, there was about maybe like 18 kids in the preschool class, and 2 other children in the class. Right away, I suspected strongly
Yes.
had autism, and near the end of the preschool year, as it turns out, were also diagnosed. So I think when your child is diagnosed and you're reading everything under the sun and you're connecting with other autism families and you're at therapies where other children are in the same space getting therapy at the same time as your kid, you start to see all the different faces of autism, and you do start to pick up on it so quickly and see it everywhere. And
Yes.
so yeah, then there have been times where I've wanted to extend a friendly greeting to a family to say, "Oh, hi, I think we're on the same team." And my husband has said, "No, you can't do that.
Yes.
Back away. That's it's none of your business." And so I think, oh, but I could help. And ultimately he's right, of course. And we end up leaving the playground, water park, school, community center, whatever it is, without me saying anything, just to protect their privacy. But it's
Absolutely. And I
delicate.
know when we do get to that podcast, I'll recite you a story about what happened to me, which I learned an awful lot from, and I'm sure audience members will as well, and I'm sure both of you have many more stories about that. Now, unfortunately for today, April 1st, this does conclude our podcast for today, but I want you all to join us again for tomorrow, April 2nd, which we all know is Autism Awareness Day, and I'm sure we all
Go
have
team.
wonderful festivities out there planned for our kids and community. So I hope you all all have a wonderful April Fool's joke, but we're not fools today. And join us tomorrow for April 2nd on Autism Awareness Day with our new parent to our panel, Jess, and of course, our famous Tina, who's been with us always. And join me, Tally, to live and love. See you tomorrow.
Hey yo, I'm an autism awareness